Welcome to the show, WTTS, LOL, hashtag Mark and Pete.
Hello and welcome to the show, Colourful Conversations with Mark and Pete. Each week, Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark debate an important subject. This week we ask, have we set up our children to fail? Well, when I look around the society today, I just ask a simple question. Is it really possible that we've set up an entire generation to fail? When I look at things such as the way that we educate our children, we constantly keep changing the way our curriculum is set, even the way we even examine our children. But then I look at other things as well, such as the way that certain issues, real serious issues about sexual offences and exploitation, a disaster for society. And then we look at other things about how much social media is affecting the minds of our children. What is going wrong? Well, with me today is Clergyman Pete, a man of the cloth, but also a parent as well. So, Clergyman Pete, have we really set up our children to fail in the 21st century?
Well, businessman Mark, speaking to a businessman, I think obviously business is to blame for selling all these pesky gadgets to unsuspecting youngsters and causing exploitation of the malleable mind. It does seem that, whether you call them Generation Z or Generation Z, post-millennials or the I generation or whatever you want to call them, those people who have grown up with the internet and smartphones and iPads and very portable computers, but basically being freely available, have been molded by that reality. So the way they speak, the way they write language has changed, hence my introduction to the show.
Yes, what are they?
LOL is of course laugh out loud, famously. Esteemed ex-Prime Minister used LOL thinking it was lots of love and not laugh out loud, and committed a social faux pas, dear oh dear. But he was, of course, of a later generation, more of our generation, in fact. Whereas those who've been brought up with such things immediately know what the abbreviations stand for. They're sort of steeped in it. But have they been? Does this mean they're going to fail? Well, not in itself, of course. Having another layer to your language doesn't do that. But if the way that you communicate is shaped by the sort of interaction you get presently anyway on social media, then you're not necessarily trained and alert to real life social interaction, which is an extremely complex process. We don't notice it because we've just absorbed it as we've grown up. But if you grow up using your phone to communicate, even if someone's sitting next to you, which seems to be increasingly common, which reminds me of when I started at work in a science laboratory, having my boss, who his desk was right in front of where I worked. He would leave little missives for me with sticky notes on my desk, and I would call. I would say, Steve, why don't you just talk to me? And he would then reply, actually. But in these days, that sort of inhuman interaction is becoming commonplace. That must be having some sort of effect on the way the young people today develop, mustn't it?
Well, exactly. I mean, are we actually now, again, this whole principle of are we setting up our children to fail? Just simply that now, with all of these distractions from perhaps, as you've already highlighted, social media, but also things such as gaming, those ideas where people are just simply for hours upon hours just playing those sort of rather somewhat addictive games, but perhaps some of their social skills are starting to lack. But I'm not just talking about those things as well. I'm also talking about other things where perhaps, young children are now starting to get a little bit more confused. If we look at today's society, there are more single parents than perhaps we saw, say, 50 years ago. So that, again, being brought up by a single parent and the instability that brings to a child is bad. But then, of course, we also look at some of the other things, and I have to be somewhat amused by the fact that children are also punished for the most trivial things. I mean, recently some pupils were sent home for wearing the wrong trousers. I mean, goodness me.
Yes.
I mean, I'm all for standards and I'm all for conforming with rules, but it can be taken too far. Is it no wonder that some of our children have perhaps just gone off the straight and narrow? Now, I've got a little thought here with something that perhaps sort of suggests that maybe some of our children are getting into devilish ways. Now, here's a little thought called Devilish Days. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, eating her life away. She had too many vices and few self-sacrifices, and her body started to decay. Now, little Miss Muffet really could scoff it, munching on doughnuts all day, with lots of sweet cider. Her stomach got wider, which frightened the doctors away. By now little Miss Muffet wanted to puff it, but had no means to pay. Then came her drug dealer, who was actually a squealer, and police found her smoking ashtray. Then little Miss Muffet tried to bluff it, as a constable gave her cold turkey. She gobbled and gurgled and claimed she was burgled, but her story was far too murky. Little Miss Muffet escaped to rough it on streets and in the subway. Then along came a squad rider who suddenly spied her and charged her with her affray. Little Miss Muffet eventually snuffed it, just not able to curb her ways. Like a social outsider or a venomous spider, she sits in hell for more devilish days. So, poor little Miss Muffet, not really having the best of life, I guess, and distracted by so many things, from drugs to alcohol and so many other problems. Is that not really a reflection of what's going on today? Well, so as a parent, Pete, tell me, what on earth has gone wrong? And more importantly, what do we do?
Yes, well, well, the thing is that I think one of the big solutions, despite my disparaging remarks earlier, is business. Specifically, I think the power of capitalism. Now, capitalism only really works with a strong but small government, with most things being run on a free market level. And what this does is it frees up the best minds to be able to come up with solutions to the problem. So my first thing is to say, let's cut back government. Now, why am I saying that? Well, most of the problems that you've outlined have come from government intervention, social engineering. Now, when it comes to, you mentioned what could be loosely termed the sexual revolution. You didn't use those words, but that's what you're talking about. When we're talking about young people of a young age having children out of wedlock, people not getting married, the whole idea of marriage, the connection of a sexual relationship with marriage and with children, has been lost. It's not to say that it was ever the case that all couples needed to have children, but rather that was a possible outcome. That was the way things were constructed. Now, if you're going to have a society like that, you cannot allow homosexuality. You certainly can't allow same-sex marriage. Now, in terms of homosexuality, well, of course, all sexual behaviour of all sorts has always existed. So you can't stamp it out, but you shouldn't. What I'm saying is, you shouldn't glorify it. I'm not saying don't make an attempt to stamp out. Don't stamp on anyone. Give people their freedom. What I'm saying is don't encourage it by giving it a part in society where it's equal with real marriage. And real marriage involves a man and a woman and children. So let's have that as the basis of society, because that's the stable basis of society. Once you get that sorted out, a lot of other things will fall into place. And what particular will fall into place is if you're going to have marriage being between a man and woman and about having children, then only one of the couple is going to work. It's usually going to be the man, because that's the way we're made up. Men usually are the ones who want to do that, and the women who want to nurture it won't always be the case. No one's going to be forced. No, under my new model, the Mark and Pete model, no one's going to be forced to do anything. These are going to be encouraged to occur. How are they going to be encouraged? Well, encouraged by pulling back on government, pulling back on the pressures to not see the obvious. I'll give you an example. One of the reasons that we have young mothers having children, having multiple relationships, is they're effectively married to the state. The amount of money they get comes from how many children they get. They are not encouraged to do that. Mechanization of production, so huge industries, have removed the concept of children being a blessing. It used to be, you had a lot of children, they looked after you when you were older, because you had a farm or you had a family business, or at least it was a small business. They would care for you later. That idea has been lost. Now, that second point about industry, you would say, well, how has that been solved? Well, paradoxically, having been laying into the computer generation, the social media generation earlier, the development of technology means that with the sort of robot or intelligent technology, it's no longer the case that you need to have mechanization like a sort of production line in order to be effective. You can have things being intelligently made by machine. That frees you up to have small companies doing what used to only be able to be done by a large company. And as that develops, things like I'm talking about things like 3D printers, as those are increasingly used, you can have small companies taking back what had been swallowed up in big companies, and big companies can sway governments, and so you end up not with capitalism but with corporatism or crony capitalism, where laws are changed to fit these big companies. So that's it. Capitalism, smaller companies, local employment. So, I know it's the Mark and Pete mantra, localism. And this will immediately have the effect of freeing up people. And I believe that just looking at how people are naturally organised, it'll be in nuclear families. It'll be actually more than that. I say nuclear families. It'll be in families. I don't know why I said nuclear. I didn't mean that. Wrong word. Be in families, as in extended families, staying together, and thus the fabric of society be rebuilt. I believe that capitalism and technology could be the answer.
Well, I do have a bigger issue, actually, which is something that we talked about recently, which is about debt. Now, as a child growing up, typically you obviously follow what your parents are doing.
Yes.
And I know that we talked about this on the Mark and Pete show very recently. I mean, listeners, please look out for the show on debt, and it does raise some really important points. Now, we know that when we're talking to adults, you have a conversation at one level. When you're talking to children, typically they follow a lead by what their parents are doing, or possibly even companies where maybe they are also getting deeper into debt. And that, to me, is also a big issue because, when certainly when I was at school, which was probably about now 30 years ago, there was a very, very clear line in which it was very obvious about how you manage your money, what you could afford. And there was always typical metrics and guidance, and the fact that typically if you go out into society, you would have to look at how much you save, where you save, what kind of things that you would aspire to working towards, and accepting the fact that you can't have everything at once. We all know that technology has moved on greatly, and it's definitely added a lot of value into society. I don't have a problem with the fact that people now have games, social communication tools. I think they're all very good, managed in the right way. Where I think it's going wrong is that perhaps it's changing social behavior on one level. On the other hand, people are now having more by getting themselves into debt. And because the pressures, certainly, and I think that this is something that we've seen throughout history, where there's the one-upmanship, the child who perhaps is wearing the wrong trousers, but maybe perhaps sent home because their parents can't afford it. And of course, typically the pressure is that the parents would have to then get themselves into further debt because maybe they need to ensure that the child is wearing the right kind of training shoe, etc. But the fact is that parents, teachers, I do agree with the issue of government. Government needs to do a better job of not interfering and, more importantly, being consistent. But what I do think needs to be taught at school is certainly this idea of not getting into debt. And I think that where they see their parents perhaps struggling and that pressure, it changes behavior. It can break up homes. We've seen that. I mean, the statistics show that actually the breakup of a lot of homes, and particularly divorces, are actually due to financial issues, financial pressures, which actually is actually self-inflicted. And that's something that I think if you set the wrong precedent, children will obviously suffer as a result. Now, I do agree also, though, that businesses themselves could do a better job. And this is where I think that we could probably learn from the past. Now, when I was at school, one of the things that was heavily emphasized was trying to get work placements within the local community. Now, we talked, Clergyman Pete mentioned this about localism. This is something that I think that children can learn about building up the communities. I think that what's happened is that whilst the globalization has brought a lot of open opportunities for business, what it has done is it's destroyed local communities. And I think that a lot of children growing up in communities whether it's villages, towns, or even cities, have suffered. And I think that what we need to do is get back to those grassroots. We need to start building things back up, because at the moment, children who are going through education come out with a massive debt. So that's point one. Two, we're getting the government constantly tinkering things. I've actually looked back on some of the government legislations on education. And on average, whilst I know that you can argue that there are some progress in subject matters, primarily the actual way in which we change the curriculum and measure children has changed every 5 years. Now think about that. For a child who's coming into main education at 5 through to the age of 16, that's a long period. And if you see education constantly changing, there's no consistency. The other problem, of course, is resource. We're not attracting enough good teachers. The amount of teachers are staying in the profession, seeing their careers from when they join in their 20s through to when they leave in their 60s is not happening. Basically, what's happening is they're being lured by other professions, because children have had, obviously more classrooms are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and unfortunately, the teachers themselves don't have the mechanisms to control. They don't have enough resource, so we're not attracting enough. We're not equipping the teachers enough, and I think as a society, perhaps I think that we fail. We've now got to get back to some of the basics which worked in the past. And people don't want to take a retrograde step, but there were some good values that we saw before, with discipline in the classroom, discipline at home, and definitely discipline so that people could be encouraged in a positive way to go through education, not to be saddled with debt. I think when we answer that question, have we set up our children to fail? Yes is the answer. So I think we've got a big job going forward to make sure that the next generation actually are better equipped.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yes.
So, Clergyman Pete, any final thoughts?
Yes, final thoughts.
The show.
My final thoughts are this: without Christianity, without the morality that comes from Christian belief, either at a really heartfelt level, real believers, or at least an acceptance of the general morality of Christianity, you don't get the sort of society, the capitalist society that I've been talking about. You can't have it because it falls apart. You need to have the rule of law. You need to have people being able to exercise their free will. You need to have contracts being honoured. So basic honesty being something people aspire to, if not always achieving. Indeed, I mean, this has long been recognised. Adam Smith has his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and he along with David Hume, looked at this idea that restraining moral factors are needed in order for such a free society to be able to function and to be stable. And so some sort of religious, specifically Christian revival is needed in this country, in the Western world, in order to be part of this reclaiming this generation, or us making up for our sins of letting down this generation of children and setting them up to fail.
So, listeners, what do you think about that comment? Do you think Clergyman Pete is right? Have we set up our children to fail? Well, why not let us know? Log on to www.markandpete.com and let us know your thoughts. Fill out the contact form, and we'd love to read out your thoughts on the next show. So thanks for joining us on this show, and join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete.
BRB.